Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. That brings us to that release, which has been designated by Criterion at spy number 1129. This is a work from the year 1987, and the name of the filmmaker is Stanley Kwan. And the name of the work is in Cantonese, and please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the language, Inji Kao, or as it's known in English, ROUGE. This is the work from the year 1987, and what a haunting and emotional work this is from the great filmmaker Stanley Kwan. And it is based upon the novel by Dennis Lim, and it was adapted, written for the screen by Chu Kang-chen. And among its incredible cast, we have Anita Mui Yim Fong and Leslie Chung Kwok Wing and Alex Man Chi Leung and Emily Chu Bo Yi and others. This is, and please, once again, please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the language. This is Inji Kao, or ROUGE. This is a haunting and intimate and very moving work that could be described if we were to talk about feelings or themes of plot and plot considerations. A type of haunting love story. It is a tragedy. It is a mystery. It is also a ghost story. It has that haunting edge to it, while at the same time always giving us a focal point, a type of anchor that is centering on this relationship. And that relationship consists of that between the character, the Anita Mui character of Fleur, and the Leslie Chung character, 12th Master. And this is a relationship that seems not only to cross barriers of class and wealth and also social status, but this is a relationship that also traverses and breaks, or maybe not breaks as the case may seem, time and space itself, because we have a structure that is giving us a very complex viewpoint or perspective on differing chronologies from the basis of Hong Kong earlier in the 20th century, around the time of the 1930s, and in the present day of the film, 50 years or so later. So we have this this wondrous and complex connective tissue that is the foundation for this intimate emotional love story that is ROUGE. And what is that love story? If we were to try to describe the plot in or try to approach what the plot is, I think we focus in on this relationship between Fleur and 12th Master, the courtesan, and this young man from a wealthy family, and he seems to be somewhat roguish, or he seems to be somewhat of a little bit standoffish from his own background. Or is he? Are there instances in his own character where he must try to confront his own background and who he is and the expectations that are placed upon him? Or will he, through, say, his relationship and the type of emotional dynamics that are given to him via his interactions with Fleur and others, will he find another path in life? And so we have already here embedded in that subplot, or that particular strand of the story, this idea of identity, an identity forged in a sense of the individual spirit versus external expectations on the self. And maybe those external expectations are hinting at, or perhaps even directly related to, something even more internalized, something that is within his own character himself. And so we have this notion, say, of Confucian ideals, this idea of maybe the external values placed upon the individual on the one hand, but also maybe this idea of how individual the individual self is perhaps not as one might expect, in a manner of speaking. So that becomes one of the voyages, if you will, of character development and exploration, taking the 12th Master character, the Leslie Cheung character, as one great example of that voyage or discovery. The other aspect of this key relationship in this film, of course, is that of Fleur, the courtesan, the Anita Mui character. And here we have also the idea of a type of class or social status that is either nuanced or directly handled within the film. And we see comparisons, especially when certain, say, forces, maybe beyond the control of the characters, take it upon themselves to clash within the structure of this intimate relationship between these two characters, the main characters. So there's the aspect of social status. There's also the aspect of again, a type of individual representation and expression. And that expression is set forth in the form of, say, song and music. It's also set forth in the way in which the characters dress and make appearances, external appearances to the other. There is much to be made about the decor and set decoration, and also the fashion and dress of Fleur, and that is not just a type of artificial cosmetic take, although that too is very important in the world that is being developed here, and that is being expressed here, again, Hong Kong and this courtesan world of the early 20th century. There's also that sense of how this is also too, much like we saw with the Leslie Cheung character, external forces versus the internal pressures. Here we also have a type of external expression vis-a-vis, and it's a type of internalized expression as well, because there's also this idea of a type of pressure, a type of pent-up nature, a type of feelings going one way, and maybe the understanding of realities going another way. And that, again, is something that becomes potentially internalized, within this very complex character of Fleur. And that becomes such an intriguing dynamic when we have the two of them together and they are talking in great and deeply intimate terms, but also there begins to realize the sense of realization of maybe things are a bit more difficult, or perhaps a lot more difficult than one's heart might want it to be. And therein lies some of the great dynamic and dramatic tension that exists. Take, for example, some of the great scenes with the two of them together, and they are talking, or we have shots of Fleur, and there's moments where she wants to impart upon her partner, her lover, this man that she really loves and admires on the one hand, and wants to be with on the one hand. There is also the sense of maybe an innate understanding of maybe things might not turn out the way one's heart wants it to go. So this becomes, I think, a key focal point, not just in the expression of the importance of this relationship, but also how the story will play out. Because another fascinating aspect of this film is, as we pointed out earlier, the story structure. This takes place over different chronologies, the early part of the 20th century on the one hand, and then the quote-unquote present day of the making of the contemporary times of the film Rouge, so around the 1980s. The place is the same, but there is, of course, difference in terms of the differing environment, 1930s Hong Kong versus 1980s Hong Kong. So that becomes a type of visual stimulus or shock. There's also the way in which the present day characters try to piece together the puzzle, the mystery. So there is, as I mentioned, a mystery or sleuth element to it. Their own relationship, the relationship of the present day couple, might be seen to be a mirror or parallel or contrasting to the relationship between Fleur and Twelfth Master from the earlier times. And also there is the understanding or expression of the type of intimate personal details of one's own soul. Now, this brings us to another fascinating aspect of the film. I mentioned this idea of expression and the importance of the expression, and this is also expressed in song. This is also expressed in performance and theater, opera, and Chinese opera, and also the way in which gender and gender expressions are also applied in that type of character exploration as well. And when we speak about gender related explorations in terms of, say, quote unquote generalized maybe societal based, say, explorations, and also individual-based explorations. We will get to that when we talk about one of the great supplements that's included in the Criterion Collection release here, a documentary. But this is another very important component of the overall, say, character and dramatic explorative dynamic that we have, multifaceted in different points in time with different couples and different dynamics, but also joined together in a type of unifying thematic explorative way, which makes this film as powerful as it is, and it has a type of echo that I think gives us pause to consider truly what is going on. Again, there's so much of a mystery here as well. Things are not quite what they seem. There is a beauty to the surface, and it hints at something that is also quite beautiful beneath the surface, but also there's something that might be withheld from us. There might be something of an unknown factor that is within the surface. But when the curtain is pulled back, and when we as viewers slowly begin to realize, as we reach the conclusion of the film, what it is that is indeed going on, then we understand that, yes, things were perhaps not what they appeared to be. And this is, I think, one of the great strengths of the film Rouge. It is a film that is many things, and it is a love story, it is a haunting ghost story, it is a mystery film, it is also a type of a social character dynamic explorative piece, and so much more. This is such a well-rounded and emotionally resonant and overpowering work from Stanley Kwan. This is the work which is Rouge. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Rouge, at spy number 1129, and this is the Blu-ray edition. It is purported to be based on a new 4K digital restoration approved by director Stanley Kwan. He is credited in the insert, which I have removed here, and from the inside for purposes of the discussion of this video, or discussion of this work for this video discussion. He is listed here also as Transfer Supervisor Stanley Kwan in the About the Transfer section. I should add too that the soundtrack is a monaural soundtrack with an optional alternate 5.1 surround option available. So track 1 and then track 2. I've watched the film a number of times through this Criterion release. One with one option on the soundtrack, the other with the other option on the soundtrack. I really enjoy both, very much so. Perhaps my own personal preferences might lean towards the monaural. However, it is a very interesting option made available. Now, about the transfer, according to the insert, it states, and I quote, "Rouge is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1. Approved by director Stanley Kwan, and also transfer supervisor Stanley Kwan. This new 4K restoration was undertaken from the 35mm original camera negative and the 35mm sound negative." This is stop quote here. So we have a restoration here. Now, I am unfortunately not so familiar with the release history and the release versions of this film. so I cannot comment about how this this restoration version, as I've seen it through the Criterion presentation here, how it affects me versus how I was affected in, say, prior releases. What is quote unquote more authentic than the other? And that type of discussion. Unfortunately, I'm not equipped at all to make any substantive or helpful comment at all about that. What I can say, however, is based on my own personal experience with this film. I had seen it, but it wasn't necessarily in, shall we say, the highest quality that one might be used to. Prior to this Criterion release, I must say that this Criterion release, both in terms of look and sound, really stood out to me, and I enjoyed the film immensely. I was not taken out in terms of maybe any type of differences I might have noticed, or any type of details that might have taken me out in terms of the presentation, the technical aspects. On the contrary, I felt really swept in, and it felt very much like an all-encompassing experience. So in terms of the look and feel and sound, so that is my feeling of this presentation from Criterion, as being or this presentation, excuse me, upon which this Criterion release is based. So I am very pleased with it, and it is, again, another great chapter in terms of the Criterion catalog, and of course the works of Stanley Kwan. So this is one of the very important and emblematic works from Stanley Kwan from 1980s Hong Kong cinema. This is ROUGE. And let us now turn to the supplements, because as with many a Criterion release, they also have supplemental features here, and this is no exception to that, and there are a lot of great ones here. First up, we have a recently recorded conversation. This is described as being from 2022, approximately 39 minutes. This is a conversation with Stanley Kwan and moderated by Sasha Chuk. And this is great because they're sitting together and they are talking. Sasha Chuk is asking many questions of Stanley Kwan about his life, his career, his background, leading up to his many important works, including ROUGE. And it's a lovely, lovely conversation. There is such a lovely rapport between the two of them. And Sasha Chuk is so gracious, and she is moderating and guiding the conversation so well. And Stanley Kwan is so responsive and so enthusiastic and so friendly. So this is a lovely, lovely conversation. And I mentioned we go into certain background details, his biography from his perspective. So he talks about his early childhood days, his first memories of going to the movies, movie theaters, and then also his early, say, education in terms of science, but then maybe switching his focus, getting into the theater and performance and the arts. And then from that track, he discusses about how he ended up getting into filmmaking and film production, TVB, etc. So this is a very interesting, say, set of biographical details that is revealed early on, and it also then leads into, or it coincides, of course, with the growing and developing and very exciting times of Hong Kong cinema, in terms of the waves of Hong Kong cinema that are taking place while Stanley Kwan is active. And so this is very important indeed. And speaking about his work with An Hui, and we have, for those who might recall, we have spoken about an An Hui work which emerged in the Criterion collection about a couple months or a few months back. So he speaks about his work with An Hui, and then he speaks about his own work as a director, and this leads into one of his early works, which is the film in question, ROUGE. And talking about working with the source material, working with this is of course based upon the novel by Lilian Lee, but as he mentions here, and also as it's mentioned elsewhere, there were some interesting changes and maybe adaptation choices that were made, and in terms of the structure. Chu Kang-chen, the writer, and Stanley Kwan, and so there were changes and choices made in terms of the structure. For example, a decision to tell the differing timelines, not necessarily in a flashback, flash forward structure, but rather treating them in a way as their own stories, and they're sort of intercut in that way. So that forms, I think, an interesting type of sort of cinematic adaptation choice. Also, what's interesting is he focuses here, Stanley Kwan does, about how it's not just a ghost story. I mean, it is a ghost story. This is a ghost story, but this is a love story as well. And when he mentions this here, then the conversation turns into this way in which the film tries to, in many ways, almost de-emphasize the sort of spectral nature, the ethereal nature of the Fleur character when we get into the modern day settings, and rather than remind us of the ghost apparition aspect of that particular storyline, rather the film style focuses in on a type of almost tangible sense of yearning and longing. And so this is a ghost story, but that sense of the tangibleness, the tangible nature of yearning and longing of Fleur and other characters gives us pause to understand and recalibrate our appreciation and our viewpoint of this film as a love story, as an intimate, emotional story about a type of emotional resonance that spans decades. And the ultimate conclusion of that, the yearning, that waiting, that longing, what that conclusion is. So this is the heart of the film in many ways, as I think Stanley Kwan here acknowledges. And so, I mean, there are more than one aspect, of course. That is a multifaceted story, don't get me wrong, but it's also a story that is focusing in on the emotional resonance of these characters, and specifically, perhaps primarily, the character of Fleur. Speaking of the character of Fleur, the Anita Mui character, he talks here, as Stanley Kwan, about the casting, about working with her, about the way the production went, and according to him, there were it was a very challenging aspect to try to capture the essence of this character. And he says a little bit later in the discussion, he says that Fleur is such a complex character, such a complex dynamic, because and that makes, I think, the character a challenge in terms of a portrayal. And Anita Mui does mention about how she really tried to confront those challenges of performance head on, in a very successful way, a very, very successful way. I mean, he mentions a little bit later about a scene involving fortunes written on strips, and how she was expressing to another character in the scene type of ideas of good fortune, whereas perhaps what might have been going on in the mind and the thinking of Fleur at the time of that particular scene is maybe there was something that was written completely differently on the strips themselves, but she was expressing in her words a completely opposite notion in order to assuage and alleviate the emotional concerns of the other characters in the scene in question. So this is an example, according to Stanley Kwan, of a type of maybe not maybe duality isn't the right word, but a type of way in which her character maintains a complex and nuanced sense of hopefulness and desire on the one hand, but also maybe an innate sense of realization of what is indeed going on, the quote unquote facts of life, as it were. The facts of the matter, the facts of the situation. Maybe on the one hand there might be hope and hopefulness. On the other hand, the facts of life might suggest something towards or along the lines of hopelessness. So, but while she is seemingly maybe straddling the line and both areas or both fields, as it were, she is still maintaining a sense of a type of yearning or longing herself. And we see that not just in scenes like this, but also by the very nature of the structure itself, spanning decades going into the modern era. So this is indicative of the complex nature of the character, as Stanley Kwan here mentions, and it is a testament to the brilliant way in which Anita Mui has portrayed this very memorable character so well. And also, he speaks here, Stanley Kwan speaks here about working with Leslie Chung, the casting and the preparations, and how it was a very agreeable atmosphere on set. He speaks too about working with the cinematographer, Bill Wong Chung Pugh, and his important work in terms of the capturing of the colors and the color schemes and the way in which different time periods are depicted, and details of the wallpapering and the patterns on the clothing, and also the different atmospheres and environments that are being portrayed, the interior halls of the courtesan world on the one hand, also the dynamics of the theater on stage and behind stage, and also the differing time periods of the city landscape itself as well. The look and the setting is very important here. They also speak about the last shot. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but the last shot, the final closing moments here of the film. Then Sasachuk guides the conversation to contemporary viewings of the film, what Stanley Kwan thinks of the film now, looking back, asking him about his favorite scenes of the film. And during this conversation, I return to this. They make a reference to the fact that this is described as a type of, quote, artistic ghost film. That's a very interesting way of describing it. Then they speak too about the success of the film, both critical and the popular success of it, financial success of it, and it really gave so much attention to the filming, the film artistry of Stanley Kwan and company. And I love this too. They turn to other maybe influences or almost cinematic heroes, as it were. And Stanley Kwan here mentions Yasujiro Ozu. And so I can see that there is a type of a contemplative nature to many of these shots and scenes here. And it's also about mood and spirit and ambiance. And sometimes that mood and spirit and ambiance is affected through scenes in Rouge by focusing in on objects and the idea of the space around. And this also becomes very important too when one realizes, again, this idea of the artistic ghost story, the things, the space, the space between people, the space between worlds. And that space can be either filled with hope and love and longing, or the realization that it is empty. So this allusion to Ozu, I think, is so apropos. Well done. This is a great conversation between Sasha Chuk and Stanley Kwan. Wonderful, wonderful conversation. Again, from 2022, approximately 39 minutes. Please check it out if you can. It is really wonderful. And that's not all, because then we have a very robust feature-length documentary or cinema discussion from the BFI. It's described from 1996. It's approximately 1 hour and 19 minutes. This is called Yang Yin, or Yang plus minus Yin, Gender in Chinese Cinema, and this is it's a documentary by Stanley Kwan, and what this is it's many things. It's on the one of the things. It's a type of survey, discovery, or exploration of cinema from mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and elsewhere, and focusing in on many aspects of handling and exploration of gender and gender roles in the context of the various societal planes that are being discussed with these various filmmakers over the course of the history of cinema throughout the 20th century or up to the making of this work, which is again in the mid to late 1990s. So we have the idea here of gender-based explorations in many different, say, chapters or categories or subcategories. So, for example, the way in which gender roles are shown and represented, the type of, say, acts of, say, the acts of physicality that are expressed in certain genres of cinema, and also the focus on other types of human drama characterizations on the other, and how these oftentimes merge, or they oftentimes form their own, say, subcategories or subgenres of cinema throughout the 20th century. There's one aspect here about focusing in on a number of filmmakers where their films might have a sense of, say, martial arts physicality to them, the focus on the physical body and the movements of the physical body, and in certain avenues of cinema. And there are also a number of films from various filmmakers throughout the 20th century whose main characters are female characters, and there's a type of drama inherent in that type of say, exploration and their own, say, positions within their stories, and that is connected to many things. One of those connections is a type of genre positioning, or not genre position, but a type of positioning vis-a-vis gender roles and explorations of that in the context of the societies that are being depicted in those films. And that seems to be a type of exploration that is ongoing throughout the 20th century. And so we have filmmakers and names mentioned here: Sun Yu, Ma Shu Weibang, Ti Lung, John Woo, and Chen Kaige, Xie Jing, and Ang Lee, and Wang Kar-wai, and Stanley Kwan, and Tsai Ming-liang, and Alan Fong, etc., Ho Xiaxian, etc., Edward Yang, and the like, and so Choi Hak and others, many others. And so this becomes, as I say, this great exploration of many aspects of different facets of cinema, mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc., etc. So, and how these voices are showing sort of a type of expression over time. Again, other aspects of the genre or gender explorations as well include the way in which, quote-unquote, traditional roles of societal expectations based on gender, how these are expressed in stories. Filial piety is also something that comes up, and also the notion of how gender is handled in terms of say, family dynamics, parents and children, sons and daughters, and the like. So this becomes a very key aspect in a lot of the storytelling that is part of this documentary. Also, gender roles and expressions of the individual spirit and soul, and how this becomes this becomes a way in which we have gender itself, the characters, how they express their own feelings vis-a-vis their own genders, and that maybe leads to aspects of their own explorations, the characters, into new and into say, developing understandings understandings of who they are, and that also is linked to this idea of a sort of intimate emotional setting. It's also linked to the idea of performance and the arts, because this is also embedded in a lot of the scenes in many of these films involving, say, the opera, etc., and the like. And also it's set forth in terms of generational storytelling, oftentimes with a lot of the emerging sort of independent spirited cinema that was also part of this discussion. There's also talks about expressions of love and intimacy, and how gender is somehow inextricably linked to that in the context of those storytelling and those discussions. And so this also becomes part, and how that becomes part of the sort of the landscape of a societal expectation, and perhaps even the changing landscape of societal expectation going forward, both in an urban setting and also in a maybe suburban setting, and also maybe in a rural setting as well. So and how environment too may or may not have a direct role in that, again depending on the storytelling and depending on the story and film that we're dealing with, etc., etc. So this is my way of trying to impart upon you just how wide in scope this work is. How it goes into many details. It gives many examples of films. This is also a great primer in the cinema of China, the cinema of Hong Kong, the cinema of Taiwan, etc., and these filmmakers who are also being mentioned here. A lot of films, I think, are available now in this sort of golden age of, say, physical media and the like. So for anyone who hasn't seen this work yet, this is a fascinating work, a yang plus minus yin gender in Chinese cinema. It is long, it is robust, it is a feature-length documentary, and it is a further exploration in cinema, including the works of Stanley Kwan and ROUGE. So please check it out if you can. It is so worth it. And then that's not all, because then we have another work from Stanley Kwan. This is from 1997. This is called Still Love You After All These. It's approximately 44 minutes, produced by Peggy Chow. This is by Stanley Kwan. This is the year is 1997 is very important in the context of the history of Hong Kong, because this is the year of the handover, what's known as the handover, and how this affected or had the potential of affecting the consciousness of the people, the societal structure and change and also the existential nature of the deep-rooted change that this really meant to a lot of people. And I think Stanley Kwan here is trying in a very powerful and provocative way to give us this sense in a visual medium form. This notion of change, and almost a change on an existential level, on a philosophical level, while giving us these meditations on time and the landscape, the city of Hong Kong, also the way in which this is interacting with the filmmaking aspect, the production aspect, the notion of stage and performance, and the arts operas, once again, theater is once again on display here in a lot of ways. So there's this idea too of the outer surface, and maybe things might seem the same on the surface in terms of the visual production and the visual presentation, but what is going on beneath the surface, especially when you have these incredibly fundamental changes that have occurred or are about to occur on the horizon, leading up to this key point in 1997, and then beyond, what are the ramifications of that? So there is a type of surface, and then there is something beneath the surface, and both are equally important to the other. And I think this type of various levels, one type of existential discussion and treatment, I think, is also something very much linked to the way in which levels are treated in a film like, say, ROUGE. So while also at the same time exploring environment, and exploring environment vis-a-vis or undergoing a true fundamental change, a real fundamental change. So this is another great example of the versatility and the visual flair and the philosophical, the philosophical earnestness of Stanley Kwan and company. So it's great to have this included. Still Love You After All These, from 1997, approximately 44 minutes, the work by Stanley Kwan. And then the supplements are rounded out with a lovely trailer for the film ROUGE. So, that is the supplements package that we have here included with the Criterion release. So now let us turn to the the packaging and the insert and the essay. So I should point out that the insert is a fold-out type, and I've mentioned before, but I'll say it again, I'm not a fan of the fold-out type. I much prefer the staple booklet, but this is okay for a number of reasons. First off, we have the wonderful essay, which is Love Out of Time by Dennis Lim. This is a great essay. This is really great. Once again, I strongly suggest watching the film first, and then after you've seen the film, you can read this and the other essays included with the Criterion releases, because they do mention specifics of plot and characters. So watch the film first, that's my suggestion, and then you can read the essay. Here, Dennis Lim's essay is brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. There's so many details that he mentions. For example, the song that is sung very early on when we are introduced to the character of Fleur, and the look of the character as this song is being sung, and how this is very important. One of the key themes of Stanley Kwan's work, Rouge, and going into the complex nature of, say, idealization on the one hand and realization on the other, etc., etc. So for these and other reasons, this essay, Love Out of Time, the essay is called Love Out of Time. Please check it out if you can. Again, my suggestion is watch the film first, and then you can read the brilliant, brilliant essay by Dennis Lim, Love Out of Time. And then I should point out, too, that another great detail is the artwork. I love this artwork here. And we have the artwork of the cover design, and it's continued on into the insert. It's a really great design in terms of the use of color and the use of the pattern, which is also a very important pattern here, and it's carried over into the interior space of the release, and also carried over into the insert here. I love this detail. This is the insert, but if you open the flap of the insert, look at that. Isn't that I'm sorry, the light reflecting off of the paper didn't catch that very well, but I apologize. But if you look here, this is the character of Fleur, when you open up, you have that wonderful detail there, and I think that is a type of subtle hint or clue as to the nature of the character in one time period versus another time period, perhaps. But in any event, wonderful detail here. I should point out that the art is credited to art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, illustration Jason Reich, so designer Eric Skillman. So well done. This is a really nice presentation indeed, art presentation indeed. And so here we have the release of Rouge. It's wonderful to have the Stanley Kwan work in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog as we have it here in this great Blu-ray edition, and a number of great supplements as well. And again, further exploration of the works of Stanley Kwan and the works that also deal with many of the same or similar themes and concerns that we have embedded in this fascinating and complex and emotionally powerful tale. This is Rouge. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.